This story of Jacob sleeping under the stars on a stone comes right in the middle of Genesis 25 through 33, this saga of Jacob and Esau. One night on my comfortable pillow inside, I had a dream. And I was in a huge church packed with people that I didn't know, some kind of large conference. And the person up front suddenly stopped talking, and he turned and he looked right at me. And he looked really irritated, and it hit me that I was supposed to be at that moment up front leading the next song, which was Amazing Grace. So I took the hymnal that was in front of me, and I started pushing out among the people into the aisle and thought, I didn't know what number Amazing Grace was in this book, so I started just sort of casually paging through the hymnal. And this hymnal was weird. The pages were sticking together, and there was all kinds of extra pages in there. There were coloring pages and newspaper articles and advertisements for washing machines in the hymn book. So I kind of took a deep breath, and I said to myself, it's just Amazing Grace. It's going to be okay. But that didn't last very long, because I got out and I was walking down this long, long aisle, and suddenly I realized there were no musicians up front to help me, and I just knew I was going to start the song way too high. And you know what happens when you're singing a cappella and you start the song way too high, and everyone is screeching and wheezing and trying to hit the high notes. And they're all going to look at me and say, what the heck is that guy doing up there leading singing? So I'm going up, and a woman gets up and she glares at me and she walks out angry. And I finally get up to the platform, and there's steps to climb, many stairs to climb. And I go up to this platform, and I get up there, and the podium is super high. And I'm a tall person, but I've got to get up on my toes just to reach the microphone and to see the congregation and to start singing. And then my heart is pounding and I'm sweating, and I just wait a second. And I take a deep breath. And I said to myself, it's just Amazing Grace. It's just Amazing Grace. And everybody started to sing. And I woke up. Jacob had a dream too. And I think that Jacob was also looking for Amazing Grace. I don't think he necessarily knew what he was looking for, but I think he was searching for Amazing Grace. And by the end of this story that I'm going to tell you, that's exactly what he gets, is grace. It's a story about these two brothers, Jacob and Esau. It begins in Genesis 25, and the two of them are fighting inside their mother Rebekah's womb to see who's going to get to come out first. And it's Esau. He's first, and Jacob is hanging on to his big toe or something, right behind him, ready to fight for it. But Esau is the firstborn, and that means, by law and tradition, that the inheritance is his. The firstborn, it's like he's going to be the next tribal chief, period. But a few years pass by, and they grow up a little bit, and one afternoon, Esau comes in from outside. He's hot and tired. He's been hunting. Jacob is quietly tending some beef stew, helping his mother out in the kitchen. And Esau comes in and says, hey, give me some of that stew. I'm really hungry. And a light bulb goes off in Jacob's head. And suddenly he becomes a ruthless negotiator. And he says to his brother, oh, sure, I'm going to give you some stew. But first, you go and tell Dad to cross your name off the first page of his will and to put mine there instead. And Esau, unbelievably, this makes no sense. Sure, okay. Just give me this stew, I'm hungry. Who cares? He goes for this. I mean, it's clear that Jacob is a conniving, ambitious little twerp. But Esau, what's the matter with him? He doesn't seem to notice or care. He does know that he's the firstborn. And he does know, if you take a careful look at this story, he knows he's his father's favorite, easily. But somehow, it is Jacob who winds up with both the family inheritance and this special blessing, God's blessing that comes through his father, Isaac. This birth order tradition that is set in stone gets cracked open in this story. And you can almost hear Isaac lamenting. It has to be the firstborn. It has to be. It's law, it's nature, and it should be my favorite, the obvious leader, Esau, the strong one, the man. Tradition. That's what Isaac was feeling at that moment. But the stone cracks and the world turns upside down. And that's what our scriptures are really good at sometimes, is turning things upside down. Jacob gets a blessing that belonged to Esau. But this is really important. This story has nothing against Esau. This story has nothing bad to say about Esau from Genesis 25 to 33. Nothing bad to say about firstborn sons in general. Nothing derogatory about Esau's character or his personality or his traditional manly man kind of traits and skills. The story doesn't share an opinion about Isaac's love and respect for Esau. It's understood. It's his clear favorite. And that's okay, but that's not the point. The mind blower in this story is that God is not interested in picking a favorite. God has no interest in choosing the right son with the right personality in the right order. The story breaks that tradition right open under our feet by deliberately, obviously, picking the wrong son, the younger son, and a conniving, ambitious little twerp besides everything. He's the one who gets his father's blessing and God's blessing. Wait a second. I think we're looking for amazing grace in this story. But Jacob's family doesn't know that yet. They're only human. So Jacob goes and swindles his brother a second time, this time with his mother's help. And here's how it happened. Isaac is old, he can barely see. He knows he doesn't have much longer to live. So he calls out for his older son, Esau. And Esau comes and he says, Esau, I don't know how many days I have left. So today, I want you to go hunting for me. And I want you to bring me some of that meat that I love and roast it up for me and bring it to me. And I'm going to eat and I will bless you before I die. And Jacob is off. Esau is off doing what his father said. But Rebekah heard what Isaac said, and she goes and she tells Jacob about it. And she says, listen and do exactly what I say. I want you to go and get 2 fat, healthy goats from the flock. Bring them to me. And I'm going to roast up that meat that your father likes so well, and you're going to take it to him. And he's going to eat, and he's going to bless you before he dies. And Jacob likes the sound of this. But he's nervous. He says, look, my brother is hairy and rough, and I'm smooth and soft. And I'm going to go in there, and my father's going to take my hand, and he's going to know that I'm mocking him, and I'm going to get a curse and not a blessing out of this. And Rebekah says, let me worry about the curse. You just go and get the goats. So Jacob goes to get the 2 goats. Rebekah goes to get some of Esau's clothing. And when Jacob gets back, she puts Esau's clothing on him, and she butchers the goats. She skins the goats, and she takes these warm, slimy, hairy goat skins and cuts them into little pieces and puts them on Jacob's arms and on the back of his hands and on the back of his neck. And she gives him this roasted meat and says, "Get in there." And so Jacob goes nervously into his father, and he says, "This is Esau, your firstborn son." And Isaac says, "Wait a second, how did you do that so quickly?" He says, "Well, God bless me." So Isaac says, "Come here, I want to make sure you're really Esau." And sure enough, he takes his hand. And he says, "Well, you've got the voice of Jacob, but the hands of Esau. Bring me the meat. Are you really Esau?" "I am." "Okay, let me eat this meat." So he eats the meat and some bread and wine that was brought to him, and he blesses Jacob. And as soon as Jacob goes out the door, Esau gets back, and he comes in. He says, "My father, sit up and eat this meat that I've brought for you, and bless me." And it's real quiet. And Esau notices that Isaac is sort of trembling, and his pale face is getting a little bit flushed. And he says, "Who was it? If you're Esau, who was it that was just here and gave me meat, and I ate it, and I blessed him, and he is going to be blessed?" And when Esau heard his father's words, he cried out, "Don't you have another blessing? Do you only have one blessing?" It didn't make sense to him. He felt the injustice of it. And he cried out like somebody who had been kicked in the gut. And I imagine Jacob at that moment. He was still probably cowering around the corner somewhere. He hadn't quite got out the door. And he's sitting there, and he's like awake in a nightmare. He still has these warm, slimy goat skins on him. This hairy stuff to try and make him feel and look like Esau. He must have felt really foolish. How could he have done what he just did? And then he hears this scream from Esau like he's a wounded animal. And all of a sudden, Rebekah is right there next to Jacob, and she says, "Your brother Esau wants to kill you. You've got to get out of here. Go to my brother Laban and stay with him." So Esau is planning to kill Jacob at this point. He says, "When the time comes for my father to die, and when the days of mourning are over, I'm going to kill Jacob." So Jacob is on the run. All of a sudden, Rebekah is rushing him out, and he's sent away to stay with his uncle. He's blessed. He has the blessing, but he's running for his life. He's blessed, but he has a broken relationship with his twin brother. He's blessed, but he's separated from the family that he's supposed to now be in charge of. What kind of a blessing is this? On the run and sleeping under the stars. That's where we found Jacob in the part of the story that we just heard. And he's about to have a dream. And there's a ladder going up and down between earth and heaven, and there's angels going up and down. And God is standing beside Jacob, and he hears a voice that tells him exactly what kind of a blessing this is. It's not some special prize or privilege for Jacob. This blessing is a responsibility. It's a message, and it's a mission. I will give this land to you and to those after you. They will be like the dust of the earth, like the billions of molecules swirling around your face. And you'll spread all around the earth, to the west and the east and the north and the south, and in you all the tribes of the earth, all humanity will be blessed in you and those who come after you. Jacob woke up. And in those sacred moments when the dream was still heavy and lingering with him, he took the stone that he was sleeping on and he started to build an altar. And he said, "This is the home of God. This is the doorway to heaven. God was right here and I never noticed it." Jacob is very close to amazing grace at that moment. He's very, very close. But he's not quite ready. Why is Jacob, the conniving, terrified, ambitious little twerp, chosen to carry a blessing for all humanity? Certainly not because he was the favorite or special or particularly good. That's clear. It's interesting to me that in the Bible, it seems like no one is ever really called to be God's favorite. But a great many people are called over and over again in the Bible to be servants of God's covenant. Called with a mission and a message, a blessing not just for one person, for Jacob or for Esau or for any particular people, but for all humanity. Jacob hears this call in his dream on his first night on the run. And God is here, and I didn't notice. He's close. But he's not quite ready. He's full of fear, and he's full of desire. He wants to prove himself. If he ever goes home, Jacob wants to go home with the best wife and the best flocks and something to show for himself. So he finds his uncle, who becomes his father-in-law, and he tries by any means necessary to get what he wants. And he forgets for a long time all about what God has given him. So now, let's fast forward. About 20 years. And Jacob has his flocks and his wives and his servants, and this dream that he had is a distant, distant memory. He can hardly remember it. But Jacob is now alone again at night. He's awake this time, and his heart is pounding. He's wrestling with all that he has done and all that he's been through, and he's terrified about what he's going to have to face the next morning, because it's time for Jacob to go home. He's left his father-in-law's land, and he's going home, but his servants have told him that between Jacob and home, Esau is waiting for him with 400 men. This is my favorite part of the story, when their stories come back together again, and Jacob starts scheming again a little bit, like usual, to save his skin. So he's got a lot of gifts, expensive gifts, good gifts to give to Esau when he meets him. And he sends his servants out first to see what kind of a mood Esau is in. If they survive, then that's a good sign. But if they don't, Jacob is pretty determined that he is going to survive. So he's lying awake there that night, and instead of a dream, Jacob gets a wrestling match. Genesis 32:24 says, Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until dawn. A mystery man. Tradition assumes that the wrestler is God or an angel, because Jacob, at the end of this wrestling match, says, I've seen the face of God. But some people make this playful suggestion that maybe the wrestler was Esau, hiding in the bushes, waiting for Jacob. He wasn't mad at him anymore, but Jacob didn't know that. So one last fight for old time's sake, maybe. Whoever it was broke Jacob open, finally. And the wrestling match, when it's done, Jacob says, I have seen the face of God. And the sun came up, and Jacob is limping, and he's off his guard. And chapter 33 begins with this haunting line. It says, Jacob looked up, and he saw Esau coming, and 400 men with him. So Jacob is prepared to die. And that's when the blessing, his blessing, finally hit him for real. It's when Esau starts running toward him, not to kill him. Esau ran to meet him and embraced him, and his big bushy beard rubbed up against Jacob's cheek, and he kissed him. And Jacob knew that he was forgiven. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. I'm sure nobody sang it. But that's what Esau gave to Jacob. Grace, forgiveness. He said, it's all right between us, Jacob. I don't need your gifts. I have all I need. I've been blessed too. Here they are, two brothers, rivals, enemies, in an embrace that brings to life that blessing that Jacob was called to share with all humanity. God's love for all. It compels us to love each other. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Esau became the face of God for Jacob. Esau became the face of amazing grace. That's the face God wants us to see. And who knows? We might someday have the chance to be the face of God for someone else, as Jesus is so clearly and lovingly the face of God for us, who runs to embrace us with amazing grace. Jesus, who did nothing else but share the embrace of God, who became the face of God for us and for our neighbors and for our brothers and our sisters and for our enemies and for all humanity. The stars in the midnight sky, the motes of dust, billions of molecules swirling around our faces. Nobody can count all of God's blessings. Nobody knows the number. It's just amazing grace. Amen.